Sit close to the screen with me for a heartbeat, because what I am about to unfold in front of you tonight is not another rap beef or fresh. It is not one of those tired diss track autopsies your feed keeps trying to feed you. And it is absolutely not one of those recycled screenshot montages every commentary page has been passing around like a group chat rumor. What Curtis Jackson has just orchestrated against Rick Ross across the last 2 nights is a completely different species of humiliation, and by the time we walk through every timestamp, every caption, every mansion frame, every Tupac wrinkle, every Eminem shadow, and every Airbnb whisper, you're going to sit back in your chair and realize that 50 Cent may have quietly executed the most surgical reputation dismantling of his entire 20-year career, and that Rick Ross, whether the biggest boss has clocked it yet or not, has been the one delivering the sledgehammer to his own front door. 50 Cent is not finished. Rick Ross is not safe. What leaked, what got announced, and what got captioned across the last 48 hours has completely rewritten the temperature of hip-hop's oldest ongoing standoff. This is the hinge that swings the entire door on how Curtis Jackson and Rick Ross are going to be remembered over the next decade. Let me walk this thing across the floor slowly, because the way every gossip account is packaging this story borders on culturally embarrassing. Every legacy blog jumped to the Tupac headline. Every reaction stream jumped to the Eminem hook. Every celebrity page jumped to the mansion punchline. But almost nobody is stacking these events in the order they actually detonated. Once you lay them on the correct timeline, what you are staring at is not a rap feud. What you are staring at is slow-motion mental warfare. Curtis Jackson is the draftsman. Rick Ross keeps handing him the drawings. Every jab lands sharper than the last. Every clapback from Rosary becomes fresh ammunition Curtis reloads and fires the following morning. Every single time the biggest boss climbs into the ring to defend his own reflection, he trades another slice of composure for another news cycle 50 Cent will drain for the next 6 months. Let me set the stage for anyone tuning in fresh. This chapter reignited when Rick Ross rolled out a brand new album, a project the biggest boss had been personally hyping for months, a project stacked with more than 20 features, a project he framed as a career statement piece. A late career declaration that Rosie still ran Miami and everything south of it. Rick Ross walked into that release cycle with billboards, with press stops, with the entire Maybach music mood board turned up to cinematic. Then the first week tracking landed, and depending on which outlet you trusted, the number came in somewhere in the low 20,000s. That is not a soft opening. That is a public wound. Curtis Jackson, who has treated rosary trolling as a creative discipline since roughly 2005, wasted 0 seconds pouncing. Within hours, the memes were live. Within a day, the reaction podcasts had lit their candles. Within a week, Rick Ross was trending for reasons that had nothing to do with the album's actual music. But now watch the angle shift. Instead of clapping back with numbers, instead of firing a diss, Rosary slid into a completely different lane. Rick Ross started giving interviews about the long game. Rick Ross started talking about longevity. Rick Ross started dropping monologues about bot streams and artificial inflation, and how the new flex is keeping the catalog pure. The energy was that of a man saying, I do not need to fight Curtis on his playing field because I am playing a longer, quieter, bigger game. In isolation, on paper, that framing actually worked for a slice of the culture. Ross loyalists quoted it. Ross loyalists screenshotted it. Ross loyalists printed it across their timelines like it was a mantra. But here is what Rick Ross underestimated. Curtis does not respect composure. Curtis weaponizes it. The moment Rosary tried to float above the numbers conversation, 50 Cent zoomed in on every single luxury flex the biggest boss had ever posted online and began disassembling them one at a time on Instagram in interviews. In that trademark low-key laughing tone that always makes the target look angrier by comparison. It was surgical. It was patient. It was honestly funny from the outside, even when you knew the man on the receiving end had to be seeing red. The features got mocked. The rollout got roasted. The catalog got picked apart. And then, right when the timeline assumed 50 Cent had run out of angles, the mansion walked into the chat. This is the moment my jaw actually met the floor. Curtis Jackson pulled up on Instagram and told his followers that the $100 million estate Rick Ross had been photographing, filming, hosting tours inside, and using as the crown jewel of Biggest Boss branding was allegedly listed on Airbnb. Let that breathe. 50 Cent said, in front of the entire hip-hop internet, that the centerpiece of Rick Ross's public image was, in his framing, a short-term rental. Curtis said, in essence, everything is fake. Not the music. Not the features. Not the streaming numbers. The house. The house Rosie has been building an aesthetic empire around for nearly 2 decades. The property that has anchored countless magazine spreads, music videos, and Slow Cigar Sunday morning uploads. You need to catch the design on the wall. 50 Cent did not attack the music this round. 50 Cent did not chase the features. Curtis aimed directly at the aesthetic. Directly at the brand. Directly at the visual identity Rick Ross has spent almost 20 years constructing brick by brick. In a single caption, Curtis tried to yank the ceiling down on the entire Biggest Boss mythology in one motion. Because if the mansion is a rental, then what does the palm tree in the driveway actually represent? If the mansion is a rental, then how much of the whole luxury persona is authentic and how much is a very expensive rolling photo shoot? Those are the exact questions that started ricocheting through every hip-hop timeline within minutes of the caption going live. Now, to Rick Ross's credit, Rosie absolutely did not swallow that shot in silence. Rick Ross fired back with a swing that on paper looked devastating. Rosie told the young hustlers, in that slow syrupy Miami cadence he has perfected, that if he wanted to sell 250,000 units in a first week, he could have played that game. Rick Ross told them if he wanted 400,000, he could have bought that too. Rick Ross told them the artist Curtis was propping up could not even show a palm tree in their front yard while he was standing on a $100 million estate. On any other night, against any other opponent, that clapback would have been the mic drop of the week. But this is Curtis Jackson. 50 Cent does not react. Curtis reroutes. Curtis absorbs. Curtis studies. And then Curtis unloads. Because right when the culture was still chewing on the mansion volley, Curtis walked into a completely different interview and dropped what may end up being the single most surreal announcement of his entire post-music pivot. 50 Cent looked into the camera, calm as a surgeon reading the scan before the patient walks in, and let the world know that Curtis has a brand new song locked and loaded for the upcoming Street Fighter movie soundtrack, and that this record features not just Curtis, not just Eminem, but Tupac. Yes, that Tupac. The Tupac who has been gone nearly 3 decades. The Tupac whose voice is arguably the most protected sonic archive in the history of American music. Not a sample. Not a nod. Not a ghostly interpolation. An actual feature verse threaded through the record. When the interviewer asked whether this was one of those AI voice reconstructions, Curtis shut that down on the spot. 50 Cent made it plain that no AI was used to conjure Pac's vocals. Curtis explained that the Shakur estate approved the record, released previously unheard material for the project, and greenlit the full use. Curtis said the song was crafted specifically as the theme for the Street Fighter film. Curtis said the paperwork is real, the vocals are real, the process was collaborative, and the release is imminent. You could see it in Curtis's face while the clip was still rolling. 50 Cent knew exactly how nuclear that piece of information was the second it left his mouth. Pause. Sit inside that image. Curtis Jackson. Eminem. Tupac Shakur. One record. For a Street Fighter movie. If that song lands even half as hard as Curtis is teeing it up to land, we are staring at a cultural earthquake. Radio will rotate it. Streaming will push it. TikTok will soundtrack every fight scene edit with it. Kids who have never sat down with a real Pac verse in their lives will hear one for the first time and think they are hearing something brand new. That is not a marketing beat. That is a generational event. Which loops us back to Rick Ross. The second the Tupac announcement hit the timeline, Rosie had 100 moves he could have made. Rick Ross could have stayed silent. Rick Ross could have congratulated the collaboration diplomatically. Instead, Rick Ross grabbed his phone, opened Instagram, and swung what he clearly believed was a haymaker. Rosie mocked the collaboration. Rick Ross said Curtis was dropping a song with Eminem and a dead legend. Rick Ross told the internet pack had been resting for 30 years and to let the man rest in peace. Rosie mocked Marshall in the same breath. Rick Ross told Curtis to put those G-Unit sneakers on the clearance rack and go do a Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks remix. Rosie laughed. Rosie smirked. Rosie filmed the whole thing in that laid-back Miami tone that has become his signature closing move. Now catch the strategic problem. Rick Ross did not attack the music. Rosie did not attack the collaboration on artistic ground. Rick Ross did not attack the timing, the marketing, the Street Fighter tie-in, or the technical craft. The biggest boss attacked the concept of a legacy artist being featured on a modern record, a swing that lands on absolutely no one. It does not land on Curtis, because 50 Cent did not make that decision alone. It does not land on the Shakur estate, because the estate has every legal and moral right to greenlight whatever fits their long-term stewardship. It does not land on the culture, because the culture is going to press play the second that record drops. If, and this is a serious if, the estate really did clear this record, that is not a mere green light. That is a coronation. And Rick Ross, in trying to shame Curtis for making the record, effectively placed himself in the far more dangerous position of shaming the Shakur estate for approving it. You do not swing at that family in a public feud with 50 Cent while the entire internet is watching. You still riding with me? Because it sharpens. The instant Rick Ross ran his mouth about the Pac record, Curtis did exactly what Curtis has been doing for 20 years. 50 Cent pivoted. Curtis did not defend the record. Curtis did not explain the estate paperwork. Curtis picked up an entirely different weapon and swung it right back at the mansion. That is the choreography. That is the rhythm Curtis has been perfecting since the mid-2000s. Right after Rosie ran the Pac punchline, Curtis doubled down on the Airbnb storyline. 50 Cent essentially said, "Look at this fool giving open house tours through a mansion allegedly listed as a short-term rental." Curtis essentially said everything is fake, and the internet dove into full detective mode. Threads appeared. Screenshots multiplied. Real estate agents got tagged. Some accounts insisted the property genuinely was a rental. Others insisted the estate was Rosie's real home and Curtis was bluffing. Nobody could conclusively prove either version in the moment. Crucially, nobody had to. Because the damage was already done. That has always been the play. Curtis does not need to prove anything. 50 Cent only needs to plant doubt. Once the doubt takes root, once the audience begins asking the question on their own, the whole persona begins leaking oxygen. Every future mansion post from Rick Ross now carries a footnote. Every future flex now carries a whisper. Every future luxury photo drags a comment section full of Airbnb jokes behind it. That is what Curtis has been engineering for 2 decades. 50 Cent is not trying to defeat Rick Ross in an argument. 50 Cent is trying to compromise the audience's ability to take Rick Ross seriously. There is a canyon between those two objectives. You catching the design on the wall? The layering is the story. Piece 1, album sales. Piece 2, feature bloat. Piece 3, rollout theater. Piece 4, mansion authenticity. Piece 5, Pac and Eminem collaboration. Piece 6, sneaker line versus sneaker line. Piece 7, the entire definition of what a real boss looks like inside the streaming era. Every piece is a fresh tunnel dug into the foundation of Rick Ross's public identity. And Rosie keeps swinging at whichever punch just landed, instead of stepping back and reading the pattern behind the sequence. Step back with me, because this next section is the one almost nobody has flagged, and it may end up being the most damaging exchange of the entire chapter. Curtis Jackson slipped in one of the sharpest character-level cuts of the entire feud. 50 Cent effectively reminded the culture that Rick Ross had, in his framing, thrown a black woman under the bus. Curtis called Rosie out for allegedly making excuses about being removed from certain shows and implied that the biggest boss placed the blame on the creator of those shows. Then Curtis dropped the line that has been quietly ricocheting through group chats ever since. Curtis said, "Be as loyal to the black woman as you have been to Eminem." Curtis said she gave you thousands of episodes of visibility. Curtis said the shows were her shows, the concepts were her concepts, and yet, in his version, Rick Ross used a black woman as the fall guy while draping himself in undying loyalty to a white male superstar. That is not a punchline. That is a character indictment. That is the kind of statement that follows a public figure into every future interview for the next decade. Rick Ross, up to this point, has not directly answered that specific allegation. Not on his stories. Not on his podcast stops. Not on his verses. Rosie has deflected. Rosie has pivoted. Rick Ross has talked about longevity. Rick Ross has talked about bots. Rosie has talked about anything except that particular sentence. In a moment like this, silence reads as confirmation, whether it fairly should or not. Let me pull further in, because we still have not touched the sneaker war. Rick Ross took a shot at the G-Unit sneaker rollout. Rosie suggested those sneakers were destined for Costco. Rick Ross said he preferred the Lloyd Banks version. Rosie implied that the other G-Unit members did not even have real sneaker deals. Rick Ross added a punchline suggesting that with Freeway Ricky not happening anymore, Curtis could now focus on shoes. On the surface, that reads like a light pot shot. But when you zoom in, what Rosie is really doing is trying to fight 50 Cent on the entrepreneurial battlefield, a battlefield Curtis has completely dominated. Vitamin water, effin' vodka, Sire spirits, power, BMF, ghost, force, boxing promotion, podcast networks, book publishing. The receipts on Curtis Jackson's business resume are Ivy League case study material. So when Rick Ross tries to poke at Curtis on the entrepreneurial side, Rosie is picking the single fight he is least likely to win. That is challenging a shark to a swim contest inside the shark's own ocean. Curtis understands that at a cellular level, which is exactly why every time Rosie fires on the business side, 50 Cent fires back on the persona side. Rosie throws a sneaker jab, Curtis throws a mansion jab. Rosie throws a features jab, Curtis throws an Airbnb jab. Rosie throws a longevity jab, Curtis throws a Tupac and Eminem announcement. Every exchange is Curtis escalating the stakes. 50 Cent is not defending the same ground. Curtis is climbing a floor every single round. That is not luck. That is design. Now here is where it flips one more time. There is a rumor traveling underneath this story I want to handle carefully. This is unverified. This is culture chatter, not confirmed reporting. Whispers suggest that the Street Fighter soundtrack record may end up being previewed at a major event in the coming weeks. If that turns out to be true, then the timing of Rick Ross's Pac critique could not be worse. The moment fans actually hear that record with their own ears, the moment they hear a real Pac verse cutting alongside a fresh Eminem bar and a Curtis verse over a cinematic Street Fighter instrumental, every other conversation in this feud instantly becomes background noise. The mansion debate becomes irrelevant. The album sales debate becomes irrelevant. The long game monologues become irrelevant. And Rick Ross, on his own Instagram of his own free will, has already publicly criticized it. Which means the second the moment arrives, Rosie becomes the guy who tried to talk the culture out of celebrating it. There is no more dangerous seed in hip-hop than being the man who publicly bet against the moment everyone ended up loving. That is a career footnote no future album can scrub. Let me sit on the other side of the table for a beat. There is a legitimate, culturally sincere position that says some legends deserve to simply be left alone. There is a real argument that, even with estate approval, even with previously recorded material, hearing Pac dropped onto a modern soundtrack for a video game movie feels, to a slice of the culture, like a compromise of the legacy. Those are defensible positions. That is part of why Rick Ross's Pac line resonated with a piece of the audience, because Rosie tapped into a real feeling, even if he tapped into it for the wrong reasons. But here's what the biggest boss missed. The strongest version of that argument does not arrive with a laugh track. It does not arrive with a Curtis punchline attached. It does not arrive from a rapper who has been in public war with 50 Cent for more than a decade. The moment the message is welded to the messenger's grudge, the whole moral weight evaporates. That is Rick Ross's fundamental problem in this feud. Rosie keeps making valid points inside unusable vehicles. If you go back and study Curtis's public playbook across the past 20 years, one pattern repeats with almost algorithmic reliability. Whenever 50 Cent is entering a new business phase, whenever a new film project is loading, whenever a new show is about to premiere, Curtis provokes a beef. Not a random beef. A calculated one. A beef with someone who has enough name recognition to trend, enough emotional volatility to respond, and enough audience overlap to guarantee eyeballs. Rick Ross checks every one of those boxes. Which is exactly why, out of every possible target on Curtis Jackson's radar, the biggest boss is the one 50 Cent keeps returning to. Not because Curtis cannot let it go. Because it works. Every single time it works. This round, the timing lines up almost too cleanly. A new song is coming. A movie tie-in is coming. A soundtrack is teased. Estate approvals are surfacing. A Street Fighter release is on the horizon. Every headline, every troll post, every meme, every mansion joke, every Airbnb caption is another organic ticker running beneath the screen, keeping Curtis's name in every conversation right up until the record drops. Rick Ross is providing free advertising for a project he has already publicly attacked. Every time you swing at Curtis Jackson, you're unintentionally holding up the poster for whatever 50 Cent is about to release. Step back with me one more time. This is not simply two veterans exchanging jabs. This is a live demonstration of how modern hip-hop celebrity actually functions inside the streaming era. In the streaming era, the rivalry became the rollout. The reaction is the marketing. The Instagram caption is the press release. Whoever masters that landscape dictates the culture. Curtis has spent a decade mastering that landscape. Rosie has spent a decade underestimating it. That gap right there is why we are here tonight. If you carry only one thing from tonight, carry this. Never confuse composure with strategy. Rick Ross has composure. Rosie has cadence. The biggest boss has that unmistakable Miami aesthetic that reads like power inside a still frame. But poise without a plan is only body language. You cannot posture your way past Curtis Jackson. 50 Cent will locate the crack. Curtis will find the seam. Curtis will surface the rental listing. Curtis will surface the loyalty gap. Curtis will surface the pack angle. Curtis will surface the sneaker soft spot. 50 Cent will lift whatever is closest to the surface into the light with a laughing emoji. Then Curtis will do it again the next day, until the target either responds emotionally and hands him more material or goes silent and hands him the appearance of surrender. Do not expect this feud to cool anytime near. One Instagram post from either side is all it takes to reignite the entire loop. This story does not have an ending. This story has episodes. Based on the pacing, we are at best mid-season. Which brings me to the final thought. Beneath all the memes, beneath all the trolling, there is a real question buried inside this rivalry. What does longevity actually look like when the numbers stop cooperating? Does longevity look like Rick Ross digging into the long game, leaning on the catalog, leaning on the image? Or does longevity look like Curtis Jackson pivoting into Hollywood, television, franchise soundtracks, whatever medium keeps his name inside the algorithm? Those are the exact questions every veteran currently inside his 40s and 50s is asking himself right now. Both models have defenders. Both models have critics. But what we are watching in real time is the war between those two models being played out with two of the loudest personalities the genre has ever produced. Every jab, every mansion crack, every pack announcement, every Airbnb caption is only a proxy skirmish inside that larger philosophical conflict. That is what makes this rivalry refuse to die. It is not about Curtis. It is not about Rosie. It is about which version of veteran hip-hop success is going to define the next 10 years of the culture. Whichever man wins the narrative wins the blueprint. Here's the piece that keeps me pacing at night. The thing Curtis Jackson understands that Rick Ross either cannot or will not accept is that inside the modern attention economy, being talked about is more valuable than being right. Being trending is more valuable than being correct. Being unforgettable is more valuable than being universally liked. Curtis does not care if half the internet decides he is petty. 50 Cent cares that all of the internet is paying attention. Every single time Rosie dignifies a jab with a response, he is voluntarily stepping into a room Curtis has already loaded. Curtis Jackson is not fighting for the win. 50 Cent is fighting for the narrative. Whoever controls the narrative controls the story, controls the algorithm, and controls the culture. Drop your read in the comments. Do you think Rick Ross should have stayed silent on the Pac record? Do you think Curtis has pushed the trolling past the line? Do you think the Airbnb mansion claim is real, or is 50 Cent bluffing for engagement? Do you believe that Tupac verse actually sees daylight, or does the estate quietly pull the plug once the culture pushes back? Do you think Rick Ross ever recovers this narrative, or is the Biggest Boss brand permanently dented no matter what Rosie releases next? Whatever you read, drop it, let the comment section debate it, because I read every single response, and half of my next breakdown starts inside your replies. If you want the follow-up the second the next round of shots fires, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, turn notifications on, because when this next chapter drops, I do not want you finding out about it from a random vlog with half the details. I want you finding out about it from me with all of them. Every receipt, every screenshot, every angle, every hidden layer nobody else is willing to walk you through. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I will meet you back here on the next one.